Hey there, welcome back to the podcast. Over the last 2 years, we've had the incredible privilege of interviewing wonderful people all across our industry. We don't have a media company behind us. We don't have corporate sponsorship. It's just us. If you find value in what we do, the best way to support our show is to like, comment on episodes on whatever streaming platform you're on, subscribe on YouTube, and because the whole point of the podcast is about community and building a community, tell your friends. Thanks. Enjoy the episode.
All right, we'll start with a little Daiginjo sake from Neka Shochu Distillery that is in Fukushima.
Okay.
And this particular sake brewery is a very small sort of valley in Fukushima that they're a fairly new brewery in terms of how they've started up. But they one of their main focuses is actually to distill a rice shochu. They grow the rice in that little valley, and there's like 4 farmers who banded together to create what they want to create is a rice shochu that's very aromatic and very clean and a great expression of what their rice can be. And then they also in the process they make sake, and then they make this highly refined daiginjo sake that actually uses the shochu as the added alcohol in the process.
So it's daiginjo, but it's also then technically kind of becomes like hanjozo, right?
So it's daiginjo, it's not junmai. It's not a pure rice.
Right. That's the
Daiginjo.
classification. Okay.
Exactly.
Got
So
it.
instead of being a junmai daiginjo, which is the next one, this is a daiginjo sake, so it has added alcohol.
Additives. Yeah.
But normally
Or
when they add
additions.
jozo to the alcohol to sake to create either daiginjo or ginjo or honjozo, they add sort of a purchased alcohol made from sugar cane that's high proof but neutral spirit.
Yeah. It's
Very
just
neutral.
booze.
It's just exactly.
Yeah.
Inexpensive booze.
Right. That's funny.
And then this one, they actually, they have a very small distiller. I think it's the smallest shochu distillery in Japan. And they have a very small, low pressure still that they craft this shochu from, and they make the Neka shochu, and they make a few different aged shochu, but this is kind of their sake that they make using the shochu.
That's
so
awesome.
It's pretty interesting.
That's great.
Well,
that was so good. I'm not going to cut that. So like, we'll
No.
we'll just keep that. Okay.
all right.
Cheers. Happy to
Kanpai.
Happy to have you back. Kanpai. Happy to have you back. Apologies for the reshoot.
No problem.
So just for any listeners, we're reshooting because I fucked up. I was recording audio and we were using a new laptop, or a laptop that we hadn't used GarageBand on, and it only captured like the first 34 minutes of the podcast, and it was so good, and I worked on it for like 2 days. I just tried to
This one's going to be
salvage
much
the audio.
worse, Chris.
Yeah,
Don't worry
perfect.
about
That's great. Worse is always better. There's more bottles on the table, so
Yes.
that's possible. Cool. Okay, Todd, really excited to have you again. We last spoke a couple months ago. We got to taste this really cool like dessert style sake. We talked about your story, but because we're reshooting, just walk us through your story again, and then we have some highlights that I want to talk about that are things that I think we could have dedicated a little bit more time to in the last podcast.
Sure. Yeah. Let me first start off by introducing myself, Chris. Thank you so much for having me on the podcast. My name is Todd Eng, and I'm a sort of a trained sake expert. I've taken a sake certification course from John Gottner and the sake professional group, and I have a level 2 certification from John, and basically what that means is I took a class in Japan about 15 years ago, 1 week class on introduction to sake and tasting and learning about the process and making it, and then visiting sake brewers to see how it's made and taste sake with lots of other sake experts on that trip to Japan. And then I came back for a second week of more education and more visiting and more education from John Gottner. And then I took a test and a tasting exam to kind of make sure I knew all of the...
Make sure it stuck.
Exactly.
It wasn't just a booze cruise.
No. But it was a great experience and really learned a lot. But then that was sort of one of my early steps in learning about sake. And I would say that was really just, an entree into it. At that point, I had a fair amount of knowledge going into it. I just realized that I needed to take that extra step of going to Japan and experiencing it there and really understanding it. But at that point, I also then got a job working at Tsunami Sushi, and a good friend of mine who was also working at Ozumo restaurant and at Tsunami and at Ozumo kind of introduced me to this group of people in the Nopa area, just off of Divisadero, and the restaurant still exists. It's great. Sake program and a really nice shochu program as well, good cocktails. But it was a really wonderful entree because I got to learn with Jessica and with Yoshi and with Jojo-san and some of these other fantastic people who were very interested in sake and interested in promoting it, interested in taking that knowledge and spreading it to Westerners and other people who might have interest in it but don't necessarily know where to start or know what it's about. So they need a little bit of help. And so that's why I always felt like my role at Tsunami, which is a very fun convivial restaurant. So some people are just in it for the first date experience or whatever kind of experience, but other people really go to taste sake and really learn about it. So what I did was try and get people interested and motivated and learn about it and introduce them, whether it's through sake flights or, sake education in various ways, and just telling people at the beginning, it's very much like wine in terms of how you might approach it and appreciate some of the elements, the aromatic qualities, the taste, visually the clarity and things like that. You can enjoy it in a wine glass. You can also enjoy it in a small ochoko. There are instances where sake is very versatile and you can serve it at room temperature or warm. But basically I wanted to start by saying that sake is just a fermented beverage brewed from rice. It's Japan's most traditional alcoholic beverage. Rice is, of course, fundamental to the cuisine and the culture of Japan, and so it's fundamental to its alcoholic beverage industry, and it's the first thing people really think of when they think of Japanese booze. Although I also make the point that it's not its only famous and important craft beverage. They also make wonderful whiskey, they make wonderful beer, they make even good wine. They make lots of very interesting craft beverages, but sake is kind of its most traditional one and kind of the one I think of.
It's the one that seems to be the most steeped in legacy and tradition as well.
Tradition, it's important in its religious ceremonies and its marriage ceremonies. It really is wrapped up in a number of different ways that just nutrition or just in the West too. I think that we maybe we don't realize it, but alcohol is so fundamental in terms of meeting people or involved in some of our sports industries and things like that. It's really a part of our culture too. But in Japan, it's sake is very fundamental to its culture and its religious tradition and things like that. So I want to always make sure to start with that, but then it's fundamentally a fermented beverage brewed from rice. It's rice, water, and a couple of the microorganisms that help make the sake. Yeast, which many people are familiar with here in the West. It makes the same yeast that makes beer or wine. It's the same kind of single cell.
Sugar converted to ethanol.
Yeah, it's a little creature that we've enslaved to make into to take the sugar and the whatever the liquid and create alcohol and CO2. And the special thing about sake is the other microorganism that it's important is koji, and that's Aspergillus Oryzae. It's a cultured mold, and what that microorganism does with sake is it converts the rice into the starch in the rice into the simple sugar that the yeast can then take and do the rest of the fermentation process. So it's a more complex fermentation process called multiple parallel fermentation. And what that is basically the koji acting on the starch in the rice and getting that right, conditions for that koji fermentation to start, and then managing that into the other fermentation that takes place, the sort of yeast fermentation. And at the end of that process, then 30 days later or whatever, you can have the finished product and press it and make it clear basically, and then you'll end up and stabilize it perhaps with pasteurization, depending on how you want to treat the sake. But then that is going to lead to this beverage in your glass, which is about 15% alcohol. So it's a little bit stronger maybe than wine, but
some wines.
It's
not stronger than Lodi Zins and Cabs.
Exactly. California Zinfandel can get up there. But sake is about 15% typically. And it's can be very much enjoyed, like a wine or like a beer, and that, kind of like refreshing or paired with different cuisines, and it's a delicious complement to both Japanese food and a lot of other cuisines too. So I brought some nice cheeses. I think cheese is a wonderful complement to a lot of sakes too, because of the presence of umami in the sake. I think that's one of the big differences really with sake and wine, is that of all the different acids that are in wine or in sake, the amount of amino acid in sake is relatively much higher. And that presence of amino acid really complements kind of savory foods, or it's a nice complement to the fat and savoriness of cheeses. So
we were talking about pizza last time, and sake. Any classic sake style and and pizza choice, like pepperoni and ginjo, or like what do you think?
Well, I think I love like Yamahai style sakes, or a little more savory sakes with foods, and I think pizza is great because it's a combination of multiple types of fermented foods, right? Like you've got bread that's fermented, you've got cheeses that are fermented, even pepperoni and sausages can be fermented, and then to pair that with sake, I think is fantastic. There's so much going on there, really.
The idea of pizza as a fermented food is not something I guess I've ever connected towards, but that makes so much sense when you say that.
Yeah, it's a interesting compliment.
And then if you put kimchi on it, sorry.
Hey, let's go for it.
Okay, so you went from Tsunami, where you kind of really, I guess, maybe figured out a way to translate to the masses, or bring to the masses kind of an approachability of sake, and kind of the concept that sake can be as little or as much as you want it to be, right? If you're just enjoying
There's a variety
it's just
of
a glass
sakes out there.
Have it, but if you want to get in depth, it's as deep as wine.
I often would get people who were very interested in sake but didn't necessarily have a lot of exposure to it. So they, there was that curiosity about it. So a lot of times it's about trying to find maybe the sakes that really responded to them.
Sure.
That everyone has their taste, or the things that really speak to them, whether it's with wine it might be a Cabernet Sauvignon, or it might be high acid white wines, or
want sweet wines.
Some people love sweet wines. And so I think with sake, one of the first things to try to overcome with people is this idea that I've had sake before. I've had shochikubai
I've had
and
it
warmed
hot,
up.
I've had
the
it cold. Yeah.
house hot sake, both the large one and the small one.
Yeah.
And, and that's all that they think that sake is. But, I love to say there's, just like with beer, there's many, many kinds out there. There's 1,000 breweries in Japan, and sake has, a 2,000-year history, and now they make sake very different from how they used to make sake, and it's just there's such a wide variety. The modern styles of sake produce very fragrant, very aromatic sakes. They're, really impressive right off the bat. Like something like this is very aromatic, fragrant, has nice texture and then clean finish to it. And it's sort of great on its own, and it's one thing. But then you can have other sakes that are much more savory or much more, kind of robust. And those are good in different contexts,
maybe or like the Nigori style where it is sweeter, or some of them are dry even, but it's tough to not think about it. Like if people say like, oh, I've had, shochikubai, or I've had the hot sake and the warm sake at a restaurant, it's like saying I had house wine and house white and house red, right?
Yeah.
It doesn't really go beyond that, right?
Yeah.
Or the same thing, I had the domestic draft, Coors Light. I had Coors Light or Miller Lite, right? Like, it goes so much deeper than that into microbreweries in beer, or, real estates in wine, things like that.
Yeah, and I a lot of times I don't necessarily try to jump ahead and if people are interested in all the different varieties, especially, when talking to a lot of wine people who might think of those analogs of vintage or, estates or different regions. But, just fundamentally, there's a deliciousness with sake, but there's also a variety. So, finding the ones that either pair with your meal or your expectations that night, or just, you want to pour something in your glass that's gonna make you happy or make the evening go a little bit smoother. I think that was always I felt like my job was really to try to figure out what's going to make the customer happy with this beverage in particular, because I really want people to try and enjoy sake. And you talk about Nigori a little bit, and Nigori is often I feel like a good entree or a good training wheels. Like
great
people are like,
gateway
sake. People, they might have had hot sake and they're like, oh, that's very different. But you pour a Nigori sake, it's cloudy, it's visually different. The inexpensive ones that are from California breweries are often sweet, and kind of that can be pleasant. But temperature and texture wise, it's very different. So I feel like that's a good gateway. Now,
sure.
It's also not the end point. I mean, people might like that. That's great, and maybe try a ginjo or daiginjo sake next, because it's a more traditional sake, but it's more dry. It's got more kind of fruit component.
It's completely different.
It's very different. So
because in Nigori, I think a lot of times we always think of it as like a sweet product, but it also has tannin from like the rice the rice particles that are in it.
It can have like a chewiness or a richer texture, and I think it's a very much a good gateway to something different with sake, but it's also something that I feel like, if you like that, try these other things too, and I think texture with sake is a very interesting and important thing as well, because I think with wine, they do talk about texture a little bit, especially with like burgundies or things like that. But sometimes they lose, or they don't talk about the texture as much as they should, or they're not as aware of the texture in the wine. But with sake, it's such an important function, how the sake lays on the palate and finishes, and does it disappear quickly, or is there a longer finish to it? That textural element is super important with sake. So.
And the fruit profile, like I'm immediately thinking of like what would be my jump off point from Nigori into something else. And last episode we talked a lot about Wakatake and Kuroshi, right?
Yes.
And it's just so much melon and like cantaloupe, and it's just so like it's so immediately pleasant, and it's like kind of unctual in a way with so much fruit that's something that I think would be like an easy layup. It's not bone dry. It's not like austere. It doesn't have like a white mushroom characteristic to it. Maybe it does, but all of that is kind of a little more drowned out, I think, by the melon kind of vibes that the.
It's funny with sake. I feel like a lot of, maybe even serious sake connoisseurs in Japan, or at least people who are, concerned about food and sushi, often really lean towards really austere, clean styles of sake that aren't necessarily the most impressive, or maybe it doesn't necessarily speak to everyone.
Sure.
I think they're very thinking of it more in terms of how palate cleansing it is, or how clean a flavor it is. And so that's why things like Kubota or Niigata, where it's like Tande Karakuchi, is very desired in a flavor profile, and that's the super dry sakes.
Right.
I think of like super dry sakes as being easy drinking in one way, in the same way that maybe a pilsner beer is, or a light beer is super easy drinking.
It's not offensive to anyone.
It's not offensive, and you can drink a lot of it without wearying the palate, or without it interfering too much. But I don't always love the Tande Karakuchi, the super dry sake. It's just from a personal perspective, it always strikes me as being a little bit too inoffensive and too like boring, if you will. And hey, I get why they're popular, and I get why people like, quote unquote boring styles, but it's not necessarily the thing that it speaks to me. So
I think it's similar, right? When you think about maybe not entry wine drinkers, but right, there's like a lot of desire around like Pinot Noir, because it's similar. It's not like overtly offensive. It's palatable. It's not too tannic. It's not a
barnyard Syrah or anything like
it doesn't
that.
have any like really like austere characteristics to it. Some can, obviously, but it makes me think of that in my head, because I'm like, obviously Pinot can be great, and it can be wildly diverse, and there's a lot of people think the best wine in the world is made from Pinot Noir, but the rabbit hole is so much deeper.
Oh, it's a great rabbit hole to go down. Trust me. I absolutely encourage people to do that. And I think that's the thing about sake. It's just there's really, you start maybe like layers of an onion. You like peel away one thing, and you're like, oh, I think I got this. And then you realize, oh no, there's so much more to this. Like this region is not just these things, and not just, Niigata is maybe another good example of that, where, you think it's just one type of sake. Well, no, actually you get into it and you realize that there are a lot of breweries doing new things, different things, and pushing that envelope and doing something totally different. And hey, that's great,
the world's evolving, and I think that we all see that, and it's so important. I wrote down a couple things here that I just want to kind of touch on. I mean, when we talk about sake, right, when we talk about the world of sake, I think about kind of like sake as a whole, right? Like, how do you feel like sake is doing as a whole in the marketplace?
Great question. I think that sake is now fairly mature in the California marketplace. It's basically still very novel or new territory for a lot of people. But at the same time, there are a lot of sake breweries from Japan that have, been importing to the United States for a while. There are tons and tons of Japanese restaurants and other restaurants that, are trying to bring sakes to the market. When I started maybe drinking sake in the early 2000s in the U.S., it's very different from how the landscape looks now, in terms of how many different places you can try sake at, or where you can buy sake. And also, of course, the internet and global shipping really has changed that as well. But, I think that there's still a lot of maybe hesitation around cultural identity
Right.
with sake
Yeah.
that, needs to be overcome. Like I've long ago sort of got introduced to sake out of context of just Japanese food.
Sure.
Even though Tsunami was sushi bar, a lively, creative sushi bar, but nevertheless just a sushi bar at its heart. But I also experienced sake in barbecue restaurants, with lots of smoked meats. I had sake with a lot of fried foods, and I think that's wonderful. And I think that there's always been a lot of people, promoting sake who are like, yeah, try sake with different foods. It's a wonderful combination. I don't know that it's that easy to get people out of the cultural, sort of pigeonholing of
Well, at one point we started
sushi
drinking
with sake.
French wine, not eating French food.
Yeah,
So
exactly.
So I guess it has to start somewhere. Sometime.
Yeah. I mean, you don't just have French food with French wine with French food,
Right.
or Italian wine with Italian food,
Yeah.
right? You can definitely feel free to mix it up, and I think that sake is very complementary with a lot of foods, and it also, from a personal perspective, I feel like it's a little bit more gentle in terms of how easy it is on the hangover,
Sure.
The after effects of drinking, more than a couple glasses, but it's just the cultural thing, and I think that's important. People really, when they have sushi, they're like, oh, I want to have sake with this.
Right.
This is something that really, begs for sake. Whereas sometimes with pizza, for example, like I will drink sake with pizza, and I will drink sake with tacos.
Yeah.
But I don't know that a lot of people do or ever will.
Right.
But that's okay. I think that it's enough for me to just keep putting it out there that this is the 21st century.
Right.
We live in one of the most amazing things about living in the time that we are is that we just have access to all of these products from all over, and all this knowledge or craft from all over, and we can appreciate sake from Japan, we can appreciate wine from France, we can appreciate a beer from Germany, or wine from Australia or something, and all those things are sort of an expression of that culture, an expression of that place, and really the people that are creating those things, and so we can appreciate all the great things that they've done to create this thing, and then enjoy it with our pizza from somewhere else.
Right. Yeah.
So
we live in like such a great city in San Francisco in regard to like cultural diversity and the diversity of cuisine that it's an embarrassment of riches, right?
Yeah.
I hear all the time about new cuisines that I've never even heard about. Like there's Guamanian restaurants that are opening and stuff like that. I obviously I'm an ignorant white guy. What's Guamanian food?
The world is an ever expanding place. I feel like,
Yeah.
and to that point, I think that in the United States, where we tend to think of these coastal cities as being very kind of weighty, but there's a huge part of this country that doesn't have so much access to sake.
True.
But I feel like there is starting to become this knowledge and interest, and the fact that there's so much stuff online, there's so much information online, there's so many podcasts or other, things that you can participate in, and you're not just, constrained by, the small town that you live in or whatever.
Sure. Yeah.
So I think that there is great interest and growing amount of interest in the South. I've spoken with people brewing sake in Virginia, people brewing sake in Tennessee.
There's a guy in Arizona.
Arizona.
Arizona's first sake.
Absolutely, yeah. There's a couple of great people brewing sake here in San Francisco, the Sequoia Sake and Den. But there's a lot of knowledge and interests in this craft, and people putting their own spin on things. I think that's great. I think that let's take that knowledge and that craft and make your own thing, because everyone has to kind of put their own stamp on things.
Sure.
Yeah.
Well, and I love the way that you're approaching sake. I mean, I can hear the trepidation, right? You're not dealing with like ultimates or absolutes. You're always leaving like room for kind of improvisation, let's say.
Yeah.
But you said something earlier on, and it was about people and wanting to promote sake. It wasn't about selling sake.
Yeah.
It wasn't about making people understand sake. It was about promoting sake. And I thought that was a really great kind of thought of like propping it up, not necessarily like trying to force feed people.
Right. There's so many promoters in that spirits world, and there's a lot of choice out there in the world. So I think that it's difficult to get that message across, but at the same time, there's so many people who do appreciate it and will seek it out and will listen when you say, hey, this sake is really delicious, and this is why it's delicious, because these people made these choices to intentionally do these things, where they've got this tradition, and I love being able to explain that. I mean, the sakes that I'm currently working with, these ones are all from Sake Tengoku, which is based up in Napa. The name translates to Sake Heaven, and I think that Sake Tengoku, it's done a wonderful job of selecting a few breweries from Honshu, from this parts of Japan that are very sort of mountainous and more craft, more craft breweries out of the mainstream. And Sake Tengoku has breweries in Tochigi, in Gunma, and in Niigata, and in Fukushima, like the Ryusho. And I think that one of the nice things is that they really present these small craft breweries that are traditional, but the food, the sakes translate with food from all over, and we can hopefully make people appreciate that these sakes are, can be enjoyed in the context of traditional Japanese food, but also in the context of maybe a food pairing menu, something that's high-end, elegant style of restaurant, or in other contexts entirely, whether it's empanadas or tacos or things that
or
are
just having a glass of something at the park. I mean, I think one of the beautiful things that sake has done is the diversification of formats, right? You've seen cans, we see the 1 cups, we see, well, I'm totally spacing. What's the 330 milliliter, 720 milliliter, 1.8 liter? Yeah. You've got all these different formats, and I think that that's really helpful as well, especially for like at-home consumption.
Absolutely,
because so many wineries are moving away from half bottles that you don't want to open a whole bottle. I do it all the time. I get home, I go, I would really like a glass of something. I have a Corvin, but then I always go like, well, I won't actually finish it. So then I just sit there and I think about all night, like, I wish I had beer in the fridge, or I wish I had like a single serve thing. But, wineries have moved away from a lot of half bottles for cost wise. But
right. Well, sake was one of the original RTD beverages. People in the industry talk about those RTD, ready to drink.
Right.
Just pop the top and on your way. Well, sake came up with a 1 cup sake basically when the Shinkansen, the bullet train, was the inaugural bullet train came out. They came out with, cup size sake, which at the time was 180 mil. And now it's like either 180 mil or 200 mil.
Right.
But 180 mil, has a sort of tradition. It's 1 go of sake, and a go is 180 mils. And then this size bottle, which is the wine bottle size, is called the yongo, being the four times 180 mil.
Got it.
So 720 mils. And then the isho, being the 1.8 liter, is 10 go.
I see. That's
so that's everything goes on that 180 mil, except for the 300 mil. That's just called 300 mil.
Right. Yeah.
I'm actually not sure what that's
funny.
Where that came, who invented that, but it's 300 mil. It's the half bottle size, essentially. So it's a little bit less than half bottle. And one of the wonderful things also about sake is that it's very forgiving when you open it. People often ask, like, oh, how long does this bottle of sake last in your fridge, because they want to have a glass and they know they can't finish the whole bottle. And I'm like, well, It kind of does depend. Like, it doesn't last that long in my fridge, but in theory, it can last several weeks.
Right.
It's very forgiving. You can store it in, like, out of the strong light, but, like, just you don't have to store it refrigerated for most sakes. But in the fridge is probably best, and it won't go bad in the same way that a wine, 2 or 3 days later with a wine, after you open a bottle of wine, it'll be too
Falls apart.
It falls apart, and it'll be too sour to really enjoy. Sake doesn't behave that way. You can open it up, and it might aromatically decline a little bit. The texture might change a little bit, but I'd say, you have at least a couple of weeks to enjoy that sake, no problem.
Right.
So,
yeah, and additionally, this is something that we talked about last time, is using that in a restaurant setting or a wine bar setting is also really advantageous, because a lot of times, not that you wouldn't day dot or like write the date on the back of the bottle of the sake once you open it, but a lot of times you're going like, oh, it's day 2 on this wine. Let me evaluate it. Day 3, is it still showing well? Do I need to dump it out? Right. Yeah. In slower seasons, not every wine bar deals with this, obviously, but
not with sake. Absolutely.
Sake.
You can open it up and pour a glass out, a few days later, week or 2 later, it's still no problem. You won't notice any decline.
Right.
And you can also use that as an opportunity maybe to pour samples. If someone, would like to try it without, committing, you'll have that ability to pour a sample without losing the, or thinking now the clock is ticking on this bottle. I mean, I better sell the rest of it. Yeah. So I definitely tell sommeliers, that the best way of promoting sake is really to have a good by the glass program. Right. Have a few sakes available by the glass that people can, purchase either a glass or half glass. And, for me, the other thing about sake is you don't have to use as big of a pour as with wine. I mean, sometimes with wine, they really want to make sure you have 4.5 or 5 ounces or even 6 ounce pour. I have seen a lot of people go to that, but that would be excessive, I think, with sake. Sure. So you can go with a 3 ounce pour. I was
going to ask, how do you feel between 2, 3, or 4? Like where it should fall?
Yeah, I think that 3 ounce pour is perfectly good for but it kind of matters a little bit how you calculate everything. But I think in general you can get away with a little bit smaller pour. Sure. With a bottle of wine. This can have 6 glasses in it, for example. So I think that that's really important for, managing a program, and also giving people enough information to make a decision. If you only have things available in bottle, they often are hesitant to spend $100 on a bottle. They don't want to commit to that, but they're perfectly happy to spend $20 on a glass. But they want to maybe, like if they don't have that ability, then they're never going to get to that.
Yeah, I think a good nod to people like Ungrafted or like, I always forget it, High Treason, places that are putting sake on by the glass, right? Because they're also places that care about what beer they're serving. There's a lot of wine bars that serve like whatever cheap beer. They don't give a shit about the beer. There's a lot of beer bars that don't give a shit about the wine, right? It's not like a complete beverage program.
Right. There may be just like they want people to order this anyway.
Exactly.
So
whereas I feel like sake is something that somebody can go in and order, and if they're like maybe not in the mood for wine, or if they are feeling adventurous and want to try something new, there's some options that are safe without necessarily going like, okay, Chardonnay, Sauvignon Blanc, Pinot Noir, Cabernet, like what else is there, right? Not that those wine bars are only pointing that. A lot of them obviously have interesting wines by the glass as well. But
it offers people a little different selection. Sure. Something that's not wine, that's lower acid, or maybe has a different flavor profile. Gluten-free. People often are attracted to sake because they perceive that as a grain-based beverage, but doesn't have gluten in it. So often I get that as a question. But yeah, I really think it's important to have, a few choices by the glass, or at least, to offer people some some options.
A way for them to dip their toe in.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Well, and that's one of the things that I wrote down here, which I was really interested in after our last conversation, and I just kept thinking about, right? Is there's so much adoption of Japanese techniques in regards to cooking, at Michelin star restaurants. There's been a lot of French techniques set aside in lieu of Japanese techniques, because we live in California, because we have access to such incredible food and high quality groceries and ingredients. The simplicity is sometimes better, and it's fascinating to think that we would adopt culinary techniques and culinary practices from a culture, but we wouldn't adopt beverage from that culture.
True. True. And
it's
koji ferment is definitely becoming a very popular thing now in a lot of different places.
I had Brendan from Posterity Cider Works on. I'm just remembering this now, and we had a cider that was fermented with sake yeast.
Oh, yeah.
And I was like, "Oh, this is really fascinating." I'd never seen that before. It was really cool.
Yeah, I've definitely heard of people doing beer with koji and mixing a little bit in and seeing how that affects the flavor, using rice, of course.
Sure.
Rice has been a popular ingredient in beer for, don't tell the Germans this, but it's, it definitely is used.
Yeah.
So
sorry, Germans. You had mentioned that you Gottner,
John Gottner, yes. My sake sensei.
You have your certifications through there. How do you feel about the WSET tree of sake education? There's people that I know, and I'm really confused. I think it's like a level 1 and a level 3 or something like that. Do you know much about the certification process?
I actually don't know much about the certifications outside of the one that John Gottner, I hold from John's sake professional group. But then there's also Michael Tremblay, who's has had a few different courses that he teaches here in San Francisco, and his focus is on. He's a Canadian-based author and sake expert, and his focus is on regionality with sake. He's got an incredibly well-researched book on the geography of sake and the history and the geographic regions of Japan that produce different types of sake. But WSET, I do know some people who teach with that, and they do a wonderful job in promoting and educating with sake. So I would assume that, KJ and Jesse do a wonderful job in educating about sake. And I would say if you want to learn more about sake, WSET is probably a good place. There's something called the Sake Sommeliers Association too. They do a nice job of teaching about sake, and it's really about finding those things that speak to you a little bit. The other resource I always tell people here in San Francisco is the public library. SF Public Library has a few books on sake. They even have books on sake that you can check out online.
Oh, cool.
So, you get that immediate rush. And I there's so much great information now online. Every day it seems like I'm opening up some new either website or someone who's promoting sake online through Instagram or Facebook or whatever. And there's much more information about sake now than there ever has been. And at the same time, of course, because there's so many different techniques and places, you'll get a lot of people say, oh, sake is done this way. And actually, there's a lot of people doing sake differently.
Sure.
So 10,000 ways, of course.
10,000 ways.
Yeah.
Let's take a quick sidebar. Let's have the
Sure,
second.
absolutely.
I keep wanting to call it wine. Second wine.
Yes. The second sake is from Tsuchi Zenbei in Tochigi. And this brewery is in Tochigi Prefecture, which is kind of more landlocked area. This is a Junmai Daiginjo, so pure rice, milled down to 50%. One of the first steps in making sake is milling the rice and removing the outer parts, the bran and the fats and the protein around the rice grain, and you have to remove some of the that brown rice component in order to allow the koji to grow. So it's essential to mill it somewhat, but how much you mill it is one of the big components of the quality of sake. And when they have grades of sake now, they are categorized by how much you mill it, or a minimum milling rate. So in order to call it daiginjo, the rice has to be milled at least 50% to call it daiginjo. And that means that when you run it through the mill, you're removing the outer part. You don't want to crack or split the grain at all. So you're retaining the shinpaku, the core of the grain of rice, which is more of the starch. So in this case, this is made from a specific type of sake rice called ayama. And ayama is a fairly large grain size. And it's that larger shinpaku means that it is nice to brew ginjo sake with.
Okay.
Well, apparently it's also very easy to crack and split the grains. So this one's milled to 50%, which is sort of the minimum you can call it for daiginjo. That typically process will yield like a lighter and cleaner tasting sake, a little bit less or a little bit more aromatic, and a little bit more kind of clean tasting in the flavor profile. So this sake, the Jumai Daiginjo made from ayama rice, has that sort of aromatic quality and kind of a clean taste. I think that ayama rice, which most of it comes from Hyogo prefecture, is typically like a sweeter, fruitier characteristic with their sake.
Sorry, you're doing all the talking, so I have to make you catch up.
Sorry. Well, this brewery, Tochigi has a really nice variety of sake producers out there, and I brought two from Tochigi, and they're kind of a little different, but they really do try to speak to Tochigi prefecture in terms of the yeast that they use is sort of special Tochigi prefectural yeast. In this case, the ayama rice is probably from outside of the prefecture, but they have their own milling, their own rice mill, so they do all of that work themselves. And I think for some of their neighboring sake breweries as well, since owning a rice mill is a very capital-intensive thing. It's a very expensive piece of equipment, and you only use it after you harvest the rice and you let it get to the right humidity level, and then you are sort of ready for the brewing. That's when you kind of mill the rice, and then you store the milled rice, and then before the koji making, that's when the sake brewing process really starts. Right. But the rice milling machine is kind of usually quite expensive, and not everyone has one.
Sure.
So.
What we were talking about last time, I remember writing it down in my notes. It was, when the producers are sending their rice to the mill and then it's getting milled, they're paying for the rice. Or maybe some of it's theirs, but most of it's probably purchased from the prefecture. They're sending it to the mill. They're getting 50% back, which means that you've doubled your cost of the rice now.
Exactly.
Just in step one.
Yeah.
The cost has doubled.
And when you mill to this daiginjo level to 50% or beyond, some people will mill to 40, 35, 25%.
Right.
And so you pay extra for all of those, for the additional milling. Or in the case of tsuchi zenbei, it takes longer time in the mill. Okay. And then, as you say, when you get it back, you have 50%. Right. That's how they generally do it. So you take a kilogram of rice to the mill, and when you get it back, it's only 500 grams.
Right,
it's half of the quantity. Or if it's 350 grams, then you've milled to 35%.
Oh,
or
okay.
250 grams back, now
Fast
you've milled
math.
it.
Okay.
Exactly.
That makes sense.
So that's how it works.
That's the benefit of not using the imperial system.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
You're like, it's 1 pound, which is 16 ounces. So what is 0.23 of a pound? No fucking clue. Yeah.
Yeah.
No
yeah.
idea.
And I worked in Australia for a little bit too when I was starting off with sake, and I realized that it's so much easier to use milliliters, like to pour everything 100 milliliters. Okay, now you know kind of where things are at.
Yeah.
It's easier to do. 3 ounces, 4.5 ounces, that's confusing as heck to me.
Well, especially given like when you're a bar manager and you're like buying things and you're buying a liter of vodka and you're going, okay, like a liter of vodka, 33.81 ounces. Like, who the fuck would know that? Like, why does that make sense? It makes no sense at all.
It goes out of my mind immediately. So I'm always having to pull out the calculator or the Google and do the quick translation
Yeah.
So
I wanted to do like a quick comparison. Maybe this is a silly question, but I'm just trying to think of an easy way for people that aren't super experienced in sake to kind of relate it. It's almost upside down to me when I think about it. When you're having a sake, and like, let's just go over the basic 3 is how I think about it. Junmai, Ginjo, Daiginjo. Junmai, usually you're paying more money for a softer, more refined taste.
Right. Yeah. A cleaner, more elegant taste. Yeah.
Which in wine, it's almost inversed, right? You're paying for the Reserva, you're paying for longer and oak, you're paying for whatever. It feels like you pay more money for a larger taste profile in some cases, or more character, more things going on in the wine. Not that there's less going on in the Daiginjo, but it just seems much more focused, right?
Yeah, I think it comes down to, the Japanese sort of ethical, or what they're looking for is a more refined character, in their art and in their cuisine. They're almost looking to take things away to get to a simpler, more direct, more clean, elegant, refined piece of art. Their most elegant, refined cuisine, or their most refined expression of sake. So you're right, it's kind of like, let's take away everything on this and just get the most pure, and something that tastes kind of like water.
Right. Yeah.
And so I have had sake where, and this is again where it gets a little bit like, well, it depends what you are after. I mean, is this speak to you? I think it's very impressive to taste a sake which has been milled down to 9%.
Sure.
There are sakes that are out there that are milled to 9 or 8.
Like the Dasai Beyond is however much it is. Yeah.
Yeah, Dasai Beyond doesn't really say, but it's probably 10% or so. But there's like Super 7, which is like 7%.
Super 7.
Yeah.
I forgot about that.
And I think if you taste these sakes, it's like, am I tasting anything at all?
Yeah.
It's like so clean and so pure. But and part of it is the amount of work that it takes to get to that, to get to 7% milled. And these are intact grains, right? They're still like the starch, but it's
fascinating to hear that you have to worry about cracking them. Whereas I would have just assumed you just mill it until there's 7% of what there was originally.
Yeah.
But you have to preserve effectively like the yolk inside of it, right?
Yeah.
If you're going to remove the shell and then the white and then get down to the yolk, you don't want to pop the yolk.
No, and I think it's about the heat also, because it's generating a lot of heat, so you got to make sure it doesn't.
You mentioned humidity, which would be like the softness of the grain, probably, I guess,
Probably, yeah. I think that the milling technology and the skill of the miller is probably really, a separate thing.
Sure.
And it varies based on those environmental conditions as well as the conditions of the rice that year.
Right. Yeah.
Because it does vary year to year. A lot of times with sake brewing, everything is like with this season and this year's rice. And so the first steps in the sake brewing is very seasonal, and I should go back and touch on that a little bit. The rice season basically will be harvested around like September or October, and then it will be stored, and then the rice or the sake brewing season starts typically around the beginning of October, and those initial batches of sake, they're really learning how the rice
Right.
is going to behave this year. So they often don't want the best sake to be right at the beginning. They
Right.
want to kind of work on see how the rice is this season, and then we can make adjustments. And a lot of the adjustments are like the soaking time, and those things are really timed down to the second, like how long the
we
water
talked about this
takes
last
the
time. You
water
mentioned,
to
like,
absorb.
micro batches leading up to kind of the main
Yeah.
fermentation
Or just the most the competition sake.
Sure. Yeah.
And sake is brewed during the winter. The reason for that is, it's traditionally brewed during the winter because it's easier to kind of control the fermentation and make sure you don't have any wastage or spoilage. And also, from a labor perspective, the people working in the farms are often the people that then work in the sakekura, the breweries.
Right.
So, you need them to be done with your work in the field so that then you can go work in the brewery.
Sure.
So,
Otherwise, you got to hire a bunch of part-time.
yeah, nobody needs you always have sort of part-time workers at the brewery, but they have to be available.
Right. Yeah.
So,
one of the other things that that we wanted to speak on last time, I think, that we didn't really have quite enough time for, was kind of the new wave of things that's happening. You alluded to this earlier. We were talking about like different techniques, things like that. Feels like there's more regions coming online that have maybe always been sake brewing regions, but maybe their production's higher, maybe there's more exportation or whatever. New rice grains, which we've talked about before, or maybe not necessarily new rice grains, but more focus on prefecture-specific rice grains or something
right.
like
I think
that.
that's what I'm seeing a lot of, are really like prefectures that try to develop a variety of rice that's really specifically dialed in for that region. And, frankly, there's been a lot of change, environmental change. There's a lot of worry and concern about climate change affecting, how, the rice crops can behave. And also from a marketing perspective, Tochigi, for instance, wants to really create those rice varieties that are going to be best for Tochigi. So in Tochigi now, you have a variety called Yume Sasara that is, a really great, for the conditions of Tochigi.
Right.
And so it really makes
The climate,
great.
the growing season, things like that. Yeah.
Exactly. So, each region now has started trying to get, the sake rice varieties that really work well there.
It'll be like the Loire Valley in Burgundy. It's like, we do this here.
Yeah, there's some areas like Yamagata is like where they'll have like a actual geographic indication.
Right.
That if you say it's Yamagata, then it has to be from Yamagata rice, and it has to be from Yamagata yeast and things like that. Not every prefecture has gone to that sort of GI model, but at the same time, I think that what I'm seeing a lot of is, this is what we're trying to do.
Right.
But at the same time, I think that one thing I noticed even in tasting a lot of sakes at an event I was at recently is how many sake breweries still look or lean on Yamada Nishiki for their most exclusive or most highest quality sake. I mean, Yamada Nishiki is, for all the sake rice that's out there, it's still like maybe 75% of the ones that people will name on the bottle as like, oh, this sake is made from Yamada Nishiki, so it's the best that we can get.
Maybe it's like the familiarity tax.
I guess so. It'd be like, the Cabernet Sauvignon of, this is the one that everyone recognizes as quality. So we're going to put that on the label.
The Cabernet Franc is what we actually do best, but the Cabernet Sauvignon is what we can actually sell.
We can sell for a higher price.
Right.
And we know that.
Yeah, exactly.
People will pay more for this one.
Right.
But I personally like the ones where they're growing the rice in the region. I think that, for instance, Shirataki 7 is made from koshitande rice, which is Niigata's kind of most famous, or kind of like answer to Yamada Nishiki. You know, and Niigata, they grow great rice, and they have wonderful water. So koshitande, I think, is wonderful and legitimate, contender for best sakes from Niigata are made from koshitande. And Shirataki is shifted and made all their 7, which is their highest end sakes, and make all from koshitande. And I think that's wonderful. I think that's, something that they can lean on, as this is what we think is our best sake. Stuff that, rice that we grew in Niigata. And in Uonoma specifically, they're the little region of part of Niigata that they're from. So I'm encouraged by that, and I think it's great. I think that, I don't enjoy going to a sake competition and seeing like, here's all these different breweries in Miyagi, or here's all these different breweries in Niigata, but they're presenting sake made from Hyogo, Yamada Nishiki, and it's like, these are all their best sakes, but they all kind of taste the same.
Sure. Yeah.
And there was for a little while in Japan, there's sort of like formulaic for the competition. You just have Kumamoto Kobo, certain
like
type of yeast
that happened, right?
A certain type of rice, a certain milling rate. And then, it's a formula. You just put it in there and you present that and you win a gold medal.
Yeah.
Same thing with maybe Parker. You make a big wine with a lot of French oak, and, boom.
Make it expensive, and I'll give you 100 points.
And you get the 98, and everybody wants your wine.
That's funny.
Well, same thing with maybe sake. For a little while, it was formulaic. Make Yamada Nishiki, Kumamoto Kobo, 35% mill, and you're going to win the gold medal and can sell it for a higher price.
Right.
But to me, that's a little bit, I understand the commercial need for that and the desire for that, but as a consumer, or as somebody who's a big sake fan, I'm like, no.
Yeah, I think for us, maybe people that are more passionate, or I hesitate to use the word educated, right? Because I feel like there's never going to be enough.
Maybe exposed to different things.
Exposed, thank you. For us, it's the same thing like seeing a score on a shelf. It doesn't matter, right?
Yeah.
But if the consumer, like a generic consumer, sees a sake bottle sitting on the shelf and it says gold medal winner, and it's $20, you're gonna buy it. Who fucking knows where the gold medal came from?
I think
it's the
that's
same thing when you're getting 100 points and you look at who gave the wine 100 points and you have no clue who it was.
Exactly. Speaking of medals and winning medals,
this
one is a good segue into this one, which is a Sawahime Yamahai Junmai.
It's got the gold sticker.
And it's got the gold sticker that won from the Japan Women's Sake Award.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
And Yamahai, I always get Yamahai confused.
Yamahai is an older brewing method that is sort of a more natural process of making sake. And what it involves is sake nowadays is made using something called sokujo moto, a fast brewing method, where they add at one stage in the brewing process, they'll add purified lactic acid to sort of bring the mash to purity and eliminate any wild yeast kind of things going on, and make it ready for that next step. Normally that takes a week or two or so. It's like a multi-day process for natural lactobacillus to form, and then raise it to that level, and then be able to move on to the next part of the fermentation. But this is that older brewing method, not using purified lactic acid, using like a natural process. And what it yields is kind of a more higher amino acid content, a little bit funkier taste. Depending on how they do it, it can be more funky or maybe less. This one is a fairly clean Yamahai, but like really what it comes down to is not adding the lactic acid and not skipping forward at that step. The fast brewing method came about in the early 20th century, and once they figured out how to do this, most breweries switched to sokujo moto. So it's like that's the standard. In the 80s or 90s, people started experimenting with older, more traditional brewing methods like Kimoto and Yamahai, where they don't add the lactic acid. Some breweries, in fact, never gave up never switched to sokujo moto.
Sure.
So I wouldn't say that it's necessarily a new thing, but it's like a revival of craft product basically. Right. So this one is Yamahai, and Junmai is pure rice. Rice in this case is milled to 65%. It's a local Tochigi rice called Hitogokochi, and it definitely is a richer, more savory. I'm serving it at room temperature. I think this is also excellent as a warm sake. Definitely has more flavor and not as kind of fruity. It's got a nice aroma, but it's like kind of subtle.
Well, it's more palate coating too, right? Like I sipped it and it's still sticking in the palate. Yeah.
Yeah, this is an excellent one with cheese, I think.
Yeah.
So I'm gonna cut you off some,
sure,
Chris.
Thanks.
But the getting back to the medal that it was awarded, this is the interesting thing, is that it won an award from the Japan Women's Sake Association that basically is an association. The people in the panels are all women. The breweries themselves, or the sakes themselves, can be made by men or women. There are, not as many women present in the sake brewing process, but in this case, they're trying to really focus on having women judge the competition, and they're sake sommeliers or people involved in the retail trade who are on the panel of, and they have different criteria. And as you might imagine, it's a little different criteria for how they judge things. And so they've been doing this for several years now. And I think this was about 3 years ago, this one in the sort of richer sake category as the best sake in the rich sake category for these women. So kudos to them, and kudos to Sawahime, who there are a nice progressive brewery in Tochigi trying to get like more international awards. They won an award in IWC several years ago for their Daiginjo sake. The last time I brought their Junmai Gold, which was a sake using sort of a more oxygen-friendly yeast that's kind of darker and sweeter.
Had like a materized characteristic to it.
It was very much like a sherry-like sake.
So I went home, I finished it with cheese. I just,
Yeah. So this brewery, I think, does some very interesting, nice things that are really helping promote Tochigi as a prefecture, but also, I think, promoting things worldwide.
Sure.
So young Toji, who's kind of active in that region. So I really love what Sawahime is doing, and I love sakes from that Yamahai, technique.
Practice, school of thought, maybe.
School of thought, exactly. I love Yamahai. Definitely, I think it gives nice umami and savoriness.
And that, just for clarification, right? Like the kind of more funky characteristic gets to develop because the lactic acid isn't high enough to kill off. We're talking about like the acidification of the environment that's killing off the bacteria, right? Kind of.
It's I guess like within the fermenting mash, you'll have like the lactic acid bacteria that creates that lactic acid, and then once it gets to a certain level, it drops off, and then the yeast can then take over.
Got it. Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Well, before we wrap, is there any advice, words of wisdom that you'd like to share with our listeners, watchers?
Yeah, I would say drink more sake. Try it. Just keep an open mind about it. I think that people will enjoy it if they try it, and give it a try outside of the context and see how it goes for you. Try it with barbecue ribs. That was one of my first aha moments with sake. Was there's a barbecue place in San Francisco, and the owner of it was a big proponent of sake with his like Memphis style pulled pork and his barbecue beef brisket. He was just a huge proponent of that, and I was just, wow, this is amazing. What an amazing combination that was. So if you want something mind-blowing, try that, or tacos al pastor, that's my current favorite of like, wow, this is great, because the spiciness and the sort of sweetness inherent in sake, I think really goes nicely. But just I would say reach out and keep trying some sake and ask for it.
Yeah, ask. Don't be scared to ask.
Don't be scared to ask. It's a nice, gentle thing. Yeah.
We're here when you're ready.
Yeah, exactly. So thank you, Chris.
Todd, thank you. Appreciate you.
Kanpai. Cheers.